All right. So before this, how did you think about your students working on paper before the session?
Before the session, I was focused a lot on students doing the mathematical process and making sure that students had the process of the mathematics down before moving on to another standard and whatnot. But I noticed that, like, if I were to look at the paper, I wouldn't actually be able to see what their thought process was behind that, the process of, like, the mathematical process of the problem that they were given. And, like, if somebody else were to look at it, they wouldn't have any idea what the students were thinking when they were doing this. All they would see is just like, okay, they have the math down, but why are they actually doing this?
And before the session, like, what was your main strategy in terms of soliciting or understanding your students' thought process?
Before the session, like, in order to gain a better understanding of, like, where my students were, I would go around during independent practice and I would do questioning throughout independent practice to individual students. And it was very piecemeal. Like, I wasn't able to see exactly where every single student was in terms of their thought process. But now, with this, like, after the session, I'm able to see exactly where every single student is, like, from start to finish.
And kind of like, what were your big realizations or what were your reactions during the session?
During the session, like, I realized that I was only asking students to explain their thought processes verbally, and that I needed to do a lot more with getting them to actually put their thoughts down on paper, because not only, like, in putting their thoughts down on paper, they'd be able to like, actually grasp an understanding of the material a whole lot more than if they were to just kind of verbally tell me during class. And not only that, but they'd also have it to come back to later on if they needed to refresh themselves as well, and they'd actually remember, oh, you know, this is something that I wrote, this is something that that came out of this lesson.
Awesome. And specifically, like, what did you implement and what did you do in your classroom after this session, and kind of what was the result of that?
So after this session, I went through and I created, like, I carefully constructed scaffolded questions to help build students up to the final, finally explaining the graph by telling a story. And I knew that, like, by doing that I'd be able to see where they were in every single part of the thought process behind analyzing graphs.
And how has this session, how has this changed the way that you view your students as learners?
Well, I currently teach in an alternative school, and we have 9 weeks for every class, and so I always got caught up in, you know, I don't have enough time to do anything, I don't have enough time to do things like this. But after having implemented this in my classroom, I've noticed that not only can students do this quickly, but it's something that I can definitely do with just about every lesson that I give, and it's something that I need to do with every lesson that I give, because if students are, the more that they're practicing this, the more they get practice with it, the more able they'll be able to put their thoughts down on paper, and the more able they'll be able to justify their answers as far as the mathematical process and the mathematical thinking goes.